Hey Jake, thank you so much for doing this. And I will start off with a pretty simple question. What's your career story so far?
So career story. So when I was 18, so finished school, I started working as a financial consultant of sorts at a startup called Luna. So pretty much helping other startups with their financial. It was kind of like actually their accounting. So
Mm.
had no skills really, learned nothing. So started working there for a little bit, which was awesome. Learned a few skills, learned how to use Zero, do my accounting, tax, that sort of stuff. Then from there, started uni, started studying commerce. Um, I got a job as an equity analyst at a investment fund, so for a little bit. And then it kind of got to the point where I was building everything towards going to investment banking. That was the plan, my marks, what I was doing outside of uni work-wise. And then my co-founder, who ended up being my co-founder, a girl who I went to school with, Cara, came to me and was like, I've got this idea for this app, and this is what it is. And we kind of met for a few coffees, and I kind of said, screw this, I'm going all in. Turned away the investment banking offer. I was meant to be starting an internship at Goldman Sachs. And I said, no, not going to do that. I'm going to go all in on the startup. And I went in all there. And then we kind of started working on that together, brought on our third co-founder, Dave, raised a bit of money, kind of scaled the product, went to market, grew to, a few 100,000 users and raised a bit more money. And then finally exited to a company called Alta, which is a US-based company in the combat sports tech space. So kind of a really condensed 3 years from finishing school into kind of exiting Steppen.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been busy, and you've already spoken a little bit to this, but what type of negotiations have you tackled in your career?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the sort of things you don't think of specifically as negotiations when you're like running a business, but they clearly are. So raising funds is the first one. So um, negotiating terms. So as a 21 or 20-year-old, when we were raising our first round, kind of saying to the investors, hey, these are the terms of what we're raising at. And they're looking at us being like, well, that doesn't actually make any sense. So firstly, understanding what you're negotiating,
Yeah.
and then being able to like kind of find a happy medium where everyone's happy. So we raised our first round on a safe note. So that made it quite easy for us to, kick the can down the road for when the real negotiations came. And then second round was an equity round, which we had to negotiate on valuation, on different terms of the Shells agreement. At the time, I thought none of that really mattered. Looking down the track, that really matters, especially when you're selling the company. So would have done things slightly differently there, but that was some great learnings. Employee agreements. So trying to convince people to come who are, the great talent who we joined the team. Even, our own co-founder agreements, renegotiating equity between the three of us to kind of distribute things fairly, were kind of negotiations we had. And then probably like the last thing, it's quite minor, but there's always a bit of an art to how you negotiate with your SaaS tool salespeople to try and get the best deals out of, and I think we did that definitely quite well along the journey.
Awesome. And having had the experience to see a few different negotiators in action, like what do you think makes a good negotiator? How might it differ from the stereotypes?
Yeah, so I think there's like the stereotypical negotiator. What comes to mind here, it's probably like the inner banker talking to me. It's like someone who's like kind of slimy and, you think you're being screwed over. So I think what I've kind of realized is you just never want an outcome where one party feels like they've beaten the other. You obviously want to understand what you want and what the other party is looking to get and see if you can find a way to achieve both outcomes in a happy medium. And I think if you can negotiate in that way, you're kind of being upfront and honest and transparent the whole way through. And you kind of leave with a friend, not an enemy, or, in this case, we're dealing with employees. It's always a bit awkward negotiating salaries and ESOP with employees. And then, if you go too hard one way or another, they're going to work for you. And same with investors, they're there to back you. They're not trying to hurt your business. So I think it's just about being fair and understanding both sides and appreciating both sides, and then, coming to a happy compromise there.
Yeah, absolutely. So much more about respecting and understanding the interests of both parties than it is about winning necessarily.
Yeah, look, there's always a strategic element. You've got to be quite strategic when negotiating. Like, there's always more to give on both sides. So understanding what your worth and what your value is. But I'm a big believer in merit. So you get what you deserve. Well, I hope you should get what you deserve in negotiations. And if you don't, you should fight for that. So And that's where negotiations can break down as well, and that's happened in the past. But if it does, and you fighting for what you believe you should get or deserve to get, then I think you can't be at fault.
Yeah. And for you, like, what's your style when you're negotiating? Has it evolved very much over time?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's evolved the most for me is probably going from like talking a lot to listening. So I really like, we'll spend the first period of time really listening, letting the other kind of party speak as much as possible to try and understand, really like read between the lines around what they're trying to achieve, what do they want from this, and really understand that. And then kind of like evaluate, okay, well then how do I want to approach the next phase of this? So definitely listening more that's been an evolution in my negotiation style. And it's like, this is very natural. It's not like I'm thinking too much about this. It's just kind of evolved over kind of trial and error and what's worked. And then I think being like just super honest. I think being transparent and upfront really like allows you to get all the kind of data points that matter and then make an informed decision. And sometimes if you're holding your cards too close, it's hard to kind of get that, and you kind of get surprised on the other end. So I think that's also been really helpful.
Yeah, what you're saying about listening there and like even being honest, like I think those resonate a lot with me, having watched a lot of people kind of train as negotiators. One thing that is a really common early fear is I need to dominate or control everything about the negotiation, because if I stop doing that, like if I allow the other party time to speak and have to listen to their demands, or if I like talk too openly about what's important to me, that will be used against me. And I think there's actually like a really useful kind of evolution that can happen there, where you start to understand that nothing is set in stone, but you can get a lot more information and trust and win-wins when you do that as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so for you, like, how do you prepare for a negotiation?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of due diligence on the people, so who you'll be speaking to, what the parties are involved. I think it's also super important to come in very clear around what you're willing to give up, and kind of like even 3 levels of that as far as the scale goes, and also what you're hoping to achieve, and then again like a level around how high, medium, and low that could be. And I think if you've got that in mind, you're kind of really prepared for what you can offer, what you can't offer, what you're not willing to move on, and what you're willing to, and what you're wanting to get out of the whole situation. So I think being very prepared from a personal perspective around who you're chatting to, and then what you're willing to accept is really important. There's probably more detail you can do around scenario analysis and get really complex with it all. And I think that's never truly needed unless it's a really complex situation. So I think it's being prepared to also kind of walk away if necessary. Most people kind of are, they'll push hard, but not prepared to walk away if that's the outcome, or prepared for the other party to walk away. So whatever you offer, you got to be prepared that it won't go as planned.
Yeah. This is a perfect lead into my next question as well, which is like, how would you react to surprises or unexpected developments in a negotiation?
Yeah, I think just no knee-jerk reactions would be, and I think that's something I've been guilty of without a doubt. Something doesn't go right and you kind of jump to try and fix it, and by trying to jump and fix it, you're kind of suffocated in some way. And sometimes you just got to give things time, don't rush it, really assess what are the options as a result, speak to the key stakeholders and advisors and really understand. And that's probably just my personality type, is a little bit, I want to solve all the problems as fast as I can, want things to move really quickly. So I think that would probably be my number one advice there, is just don't rush it and give it time.
Yeah, I really agree with that as well. I think like a lot of people have this idea in their head of like the strongest negotiators being like the most confident. And actually, in my experience, the strongest negotiators are the people who can manage discomfort the best and like withstand discomfort
For sure.
and like expand their ability for dealing with discomfort without being reactive. So this again leads in pretty well, but like, what are some common negotiation mistakes that you've seen in action?
Yeah, I think the biggest would be overvaluing your own assets, whatever that may be. So everyone believes, and you see this in the world all around, from stocks to football clubs trading players, like everyone overvalues what they've got, and doesn't really see the bigger picture. So I think that would be something that try take a subjective view of what you've got, and put yourself in the other party's shoes and be like, hey, well, what are they looking at here? And that, I mean, contradicting that point is then if you are confident in what you are and what you've got, then fight for what it's worth. So be wary of overvaluing your own assets blindly, but if you are confident, then fight for it, I think.
And
So that's another mistake, is not fighting. I think getting pushed into something that's not really where you want to go and kind of just conforming to that. I think people who don't like confrontation, or maybe feel like they're negotiating against a more dominated party, would very easily just be happy to kind of accept the way things are, which I don't think should ever be the case.
Yeah. And what other advice would you give to people who are learning to negotiate on their own behalf?
Yeah, so I think like be respectful, be honest and quite clear around what you want to achieve. I would still say be clever, really like be a bit strategic about it as well. And appreciate that there's a lot of nuance to it. So every situation is going to be different and you can't treat them the same. So sometimes a style of negotiation does require a lot of transparency. I think those conversations would be, with employees or future employees, being really upfront around salary negotiations. Like if I just don't have the money in the budget for what they're asking, like you got to be upfront about that. And maybe at times when you're negotiating with a buyer, like there are things that you might not want to be, so upfront with. So I think it's understanding the nuance to it, but still being quite respectful and honest and clever.
Yeah. And, if let's say like the difference between if you're like negotiating salary on your own behalf versus like you're negotiating for something bigger, like your company or your organization, any advice that you have specifically around those?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's naturally going to be conflicts of interest and, issues like that will arise. But I think if you truly understand from a business perspective, your all your stakeholders' expectations, what's their best interest, and you are fighting for that, then you can't go wrong from a business perspective. And then from a personal perspective, it's up to you. So it's what do you want in the situation. So I think at times there can be, if you're fighting for the business, but you as a person, as a founder might have a stake in the business. There is an area for potential conflicts. But I think if you're doing what's best for the business and the stakeholders, I think then no one can fault you if you don't get the best outcome, but you had that in mind.
Yeah, I find that very helpful as a founder to like separate almost like myself from the office and just being like, okay, cool, like my responsibility here is to the business, and we'll even like say as much as that in conversations, because I think it helps diffuse and like depersonalize a bit. And then as a final question, are there any other resources that you'd like to recommend?
So funny. I've never come across any resources that have helped me. I wrote down experience. That's the best resource.
Cool.
Yeah, like you're gonna learn by stuffing things up and by being in the situation. I can't think of anything that's like guided me. Advisors, I would always call on my advisors and mentors around me, even my investors for like, the big decisions. I think getting those perspectives and understanding them, not necessarily taking every piece of advice, but understanding where they're coming from and taking that on board has been super valuable. So use the people around you and just kind of see how you go in those different situations.
Awesome. Sounds great. I'll call it there, but thank you so much for that 10 questions. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.